Forum. We have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Good afternoon, Dr. John.
Good afternoon, Mick.
Great to have you in again this afternoon.
Yeah, great to be back.
And look at the weather, Dr. John.
Terrible.
It's cold and wet. I've heard that there's a few people proposing that we change the name of Australia to New England, being cold and wet. And I've heard a few people in England want to change their name to New Australia because it's like 40 degrees and they're sweltering.
Well, it's certainly a change for both of us. It's a complete transformation of climates, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it's not though, it's not like everyone's hotter. It's just one's got hotter and the other one's got colder for the time being, which is quite interesting. Now, Dr. John, we had a question a couple of weeks ago in regards to the mammoths. And you might remember it. There was a guy that said, you stated that the post-flood ice age took 500 years. Now, how did the mammoths die with mouths full of food, if not snap frozen? And that was thanks to Perry. Now, this particular question we only partially answered last week.
Yeah, we only just got started on it, and it's a very, very intriguing question, and I thought it's probably worth spending a bit of time on it this week because most people, and particularly children, associate the mammoths with the Ice Age.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've got those animated movies, on the Ice Age, and I suppose when you look at the woolly mammoths that had this great big furry coat, so you think, gee, well, that must have been a protection against cold weather. Mm-hmm. But as our listener mentioned, talking about the food in their mouths and in their stomachs, it indicates that these mammoths were actually grazers. And of course, grass doesn't grow very well in cold conditions. You look out your front lawn these days, you don't have to mow it very often. So grass doesn't grow very well in cold conditions, and it's pretty obvious that they didn't live in the ice because of the food that they were eating. And there were lots of them, and their frozen carcasses and bones are found in very, very cold places now where that same grass doesn't grow. So it is a very, very intriguing puzzle, and we have to try and work out what the explanation is. And it's estimated that there are millions of these mammoth carcasses in northern Europe, Siberia, Canada and the US, all across the northern hemisphere. But of course they must have lived a little bit south of where the great ice sheets were during the Ice Age, because that food obviously doesn't grow under the ice. Yep. But how do we sort of time locate those mammoths? How long ago was the Ice Age, for example? And if you take the biblical point of view, the mammoths really have to be located time-wise after the flood.
Yeah.
Because underneath the grassland that they were grazing on is sedimentary rock. And sedimentary rock came from the sediments formed in the flood. Yep. And when you look around the world at all the caves in the northern hemisphere, there's lots of mammoth drawings on the walls of the caves. And caves occur in sedimentary rock as well. Yep. And the reason why there's so many drawings there is that cavemen lived in the caves. And when we think of those cavemen, we've got to realise that they weren't, grunting brutes. They were normal humans like us. And the only reason they lived in caves is they needed shelter. And it wasn't that they weren't capable of building more substantial dwellings, but there was a shortage of building material because, if you remember, Noah's flood, all the trees were gone. So the people had to live in some sort of shelter, so they lived in caves. So that's why we can locate them time-wise after the flood. But what about the numbers of them? Because as creationists, we would assume that all of these mammoths are descended from the pair of elephant kind, if you like, that was in the ark with Noah. Now, we presume that there was only one pair of the elephant kind. It's a little bit difficult to interpret what the Bible says about the numbers in the ark, because certainly there was a pair of every kind, and I mean kind, not species, kind of animal, at least one pair, but of some animals there were more than one pair. Perhaps 3 pairs or maybe even 7 pairs of what they call clean animals. Now, the Bible doesn't really tell us exactly what animals were clean and what animals were unclean. Some people have suggested that the clean animals were ones that were used for sacrifices. Well, they wouldn't have been sacrificing elephants, so a bit hard to manage that. So elephants may well have been unclean animals, so maybe there was only one pair of the elephant kind. Well, how do you account for the numbers of them? Well, we believe that the Ice Age lasted for about 600 years after the flood. Now, elephants reach sexual maturity, some people have estimated between 8 and 10 years, or even up to 20 years. And an elephant's gestation period is 22 months. It's pregnant for a long time. So a mature female has a calf about every 4 years or so, and occasionally they have twins. But elephants don't have any natural predators apart from man. I mean, there's nothing that attacks an elephant. And, I mean, the baby elephants obviously would be prey for predators, but they're very, very well protected by the other elephants in the herd. So really, there's nothing that's going to kill off elephants. So they would be able to multiply pretty well. And when you work it out, if you start at a single pair with a sexual maturity age of 10, you can get several billion in 600 years. And even if you take the age of 20 years for sexual maturity, you'll get 300 million or so in that sort of time frame. So there's plenty of time to get the numbers. And I suppose, but as we know, elephants live quite a long time. You know, they've got a lifespan similar to the human lifespan. In fact, if you were reading your news only a week or so ago, there was a well-known elephant in Perth, a female elephant, that died at the age of, I think it was 65. So, you know, that's the sort of lifespan that elephants in their natural environment will have. So, that accounts for the number of carcasses, but the most intriguing observation, and that's what our questioner was talking about, what about the food in their mouths and in their stomachs? So obviously they were eating when they died. So were they snap frozen? And that's part of the question.
It is Studio from Creation Ministries International, talking to us about mammoths, and we all sort of know them as woolly mammoths. And Dr. John, we've heard stories about the finches over in the Galapagos Islands, how, you know, the finches' beaks slightly changed, and of course we were told that was evolution. Well, it was based on the food that they were eating, and so of course their beaks changed slightly. Well, is that the same with like an elephant? It grew a bit of hair, so it became a mammoth?
I don't think that's it, Mick. I think they are a species of the elephant kind, but and it's a bit of a mystery why they had such long hair, because they didn't really live.
Well, it got pretty cold.
Yeah, I know, but they didn't really live in that climate, because, as our listener pointed out, they had food in their mouths and stomachs, which is really grass. And that sort of grass does not grow where they're found now, because they are found frozen in permafrost. And it's been an intriguing mystery, not just to creationists, but to the whole secular scientific world, what was it that froze them? And one of our creation scientists, a guy called Michael Lord, he's done a lot of study on this, and he thinks the answer lies in what it was that buried them, because they're not actually buried in ice as such. They're buried in a substance called loess, Loess, and that is a type of dust mixed with ice. And he believes that at the end of the Ice Age, there were these massive dust storms, icy dust storms. And that's why the mammoths, a lot of them are found in a standing position. Some of them actually, like our listener asked, almost snap frozen in that standing position. Now, a lot of them, their carcasses have been eaten away and disjointed and so on. But it looks as though they were frozen in a standing position. So that means they would have been buried in massive dust storms. So while they were just standing there and munching away, this massive dust storm has actually engulfed them and frozen them because it's dust mixed with ice. So really, there's lots of explanations being put forward and suggestions, but nobody really knows the exact answer. The reason why the grass is found in their stomachs as well is elephants, it's now realised that their stomach is not a digestive organ, it's a holding organ, and most of their digestion takes place in their large intestine. So yeah, it's a very, very intriguing question. I think there's going to be a lot more research on it, but it does look as though icy dust storms might have been the reason for their burial.
Wow. Sounds a little scary, doesn't it? Icy dust. 3 minutes to 5, and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. He's answering your questions that you send through to our text line, SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, we've been talking about a question that came in a couple of weeks ago in regards to the mammoths, and you've just blown my mind about, the way these mammoths died. I'd never pictured it. I'd never even considered freezing to death in dust. It just sounds, it's beyond anything we've ever seen in our lifetimes, that much dust, particularly in a freezing environment. But these guys were frozen upright with food in their belly.
Yeah, dust mixed with ice. So, yeah, that's probably as good an explanation as anybody's ever come up with, judging, and that's come to light by examining the material that they're frozen in. But there's a lot of other intriguing things that people have talked about. How people say, oh, wouldn't it be great to bring back some of these extinct animals? And people have said, well, could we bring back the woolly mammoth, either some sort of mammoth IVF or cloning what's a near mammoth anyway, by inserting a nucleus into an Asian female elephant. Well, it's a great idea, but the practicalities are not quite as easy as you might think, because it's pretty easy in a laboratory to work with mice because they don't take up much space and they're cheap to feed and they've got a gestation period of a couple of weeks and whatever, and you can handle them. But elephants take up a bit more space, and they take a lot of food, and they might not take too kindly to you interfering with them in the way that you would have to if you try to clone one. So, yeah, it's there's a lot of difficulties involved in trying to produce a mammoth. I think we'd love to see it, but I reckon the difficulties are insurmountable, and I think it's very, very unlikely that will.
Well, they've got to try. Achieved. I mean, I saw Jurassic Park, so they've got to try.
Yeah, well, they've got to give it a go. But like I say, you need a pretty big laboratory. And I mean, with a 22-month gestation period, it's a long time to wait to see if it worked.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But anyway, look, it's all good fun. But speaking of the mammoths, I think that raises another question for our viewers that I thought was listeners. What do you mean viewers? That I thought was worth talking about, and that is how we place them after Noah's flood.
Yep.
But of course, it's all very well for creationists to say we place them in world history after the flood, but the secular world doesn't believe that there was a global flood anyway. You know, and we think the evidence for a global flood is overwhelming, and I think that's something that would be a good topic to discuss another time. But along with a global flood, what we've got is the issue of Noah's Ark. And conventional science certainly doesn't believe in Noah's Ark. They think that's a fanciful concept. And we really need to remind ourselves just what the Noah's Ark story does tell us. Because the Bible says the entire human race today, no matter what colour, no matter what ethnicity, we're all descended from the 8 survivors of that flood. No exceptions. Every other human being on the face of the earth perished. That's what the Bible tells us. And I mean, the inhabitants of the ark certainly weren't descended from any ape-like ancestor. And of course the Bible also says that they dispersed from the Middle East about 200 years later, after their languages were confused at Babel. Now, obviously modern science doesn't believe that either. You know, but I mean, they talk about dispersing out of Africa, but the evidence is actually very consistent with the Bible story, because all of humanity can be traced back to one woman genetically. They call her mitochondrial Eve by the examination of the genetics in mitochondria. And when you look at men's Y chromosomes, the thing that makes them men, all men can trace their Y chromosome back to one man. They call him Y chromosome Adam. Well, Noah was only 10 generations after Adam, according to the Bible, and he got his Y chromosome from his great-great-great-great-grandfather Adam, and of course all his sons got their Y chromosome from him. So you know, it would never have been predicted by science that all men could trace back to one man, and every person on the face of the earth could trace back to one woman. I mean, they never would have predicted that. But that's exactly what the Bible says. So, and the secular world hasn't really got any explanation for the development of language.
Interesting they call it Adam and Eve, though. I always find that amazing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they jocularly call them Y chromosome Adam and mitochondrial Eve, but nevertheless, that's the truth. And when you look at human languages, language can't be traced back to a single root language. You know, we've talked on the morning program about languages, and the best that the secular scientific world can come up with is that people started imitating animal noises. You know, the bow wow theory. You know, grunts and whatever. And I mean, that's what you pick up if you watch. You know, Stone Age type things on the TV, don't you? You know, they're grunting and trying to put words together, but there's no evidence of any of that. And all the different languages on Earth today, you can't trace them back to one root language, which you might expect if that were the case. And they're all very, very, very complex. And the further you go back in time, they don't get simpler; they get more complex.
More complex, yes.
So everything that science can come up with is absolutely consistent with what the Bible says. You know? And they can't produce an explanation that's any better.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome. I mean, when it comes to you know, the mammoth, I got to say, I'm blown away by the way they died, and then what you're saying about the mitochondrial Eve and the atom.
Y chromosome atom.
Y chromosome atom.
They're secular terms. They're not creationist terms. That's what the world tells.
But I'd never considered what you were saying there either, and it just makes sense. Yeah. It really does take more faith to believe that the flood didn't happen than the flood did happen.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we've got time today. Yeah, we probably have got time today to continue on a little bit, but I wanted to talk about the animals that came out of the ark as well.
Yep. Well, we'll go international. And Dr. John, we've been talking about the woolly mammoth and then the flood and all those animals on the boat, and probably only 2 elephants. What's the go? Species, kind. I mean, they could have adapted if things got colder for them, just like the finches in the islands. But what is the difference between a species and a kind?
Well, a kind, I suppose the best things that come to mind are the dog kind or the cat kind or the horse kind. But species is a man-made word. I mean, if you look at, for example, the horse kind, you would say horses and zebras and donkeys are different species, but they're actually all one kind. They're the horse kind, and we know that. We know that they can reproduce. You can cross a horse with a zebra and things like that. And when you look at them, they're obviously horses, aren't they?
Yep.
And the same goes for the dog kind. We've got wolves and coyotes and foxes and dingoes and domestic dogs and so on, but they're all dogs, and so they are part of the dog kind, but they're different species.
Yep.
Right, so that's really the difference. And Noah was told to take on board 2 of every kind, right? Not species, kind.
Yep.
And within those kinds, and God selected them for him, there would have been the capability of adapting to all sorts of climatic conditions.
Yep.
But the other thing that we need to remember is that Noah was only told to take on board 2 of every kind of land-dwelling, air-breathing animal. Right, so the old joke about Noah should have swatted those 2 mosquitoes or the 2 flies or whatever. He wasn't asked to take them on board. I'm sure they were there.
So they could have been following a few carcasses around as well and floating on top of them.
Certainly a bit of elephant dung or something like that. But it was only 2 of every land-dwelling, air-breathing kind of animal. So he didn't have to take any sea mammals or any fish or anything like that. So, or spiders or other type of insect, beetles and things like that. I'm sure they were on the ark, but Noah wasn't commanded to take them. They would have been just stowaway passengers, I would think.
Yes, and I'm sure there was probably a whole lot of flotsam and jetsam that they could have ridden on as well. Yes, but, all right.
Anyway, look, another time we'll talk about the size of the ark, because people have said, when you look at a children's picture book stories of Noah's Ark, it's just a little boat with a few giraffes' heads sticking out the top, and really it was very, very different from that. Yes. And I think that's a story for another time, what Noah's Ark really was like.
All righty. Well, thank you, Dr. John. Another awesome week, and I believe we've got a different guest coming next week, which will be exciting, and then we'll be back with you again in a few weeks' time.
That's right.
Awesome. It is